Welcome to the Art and Void podcast, a sacred domain to elevate artists' mind, body, and spirit. Today's guest is a special one. There are few people in the world today that can be considered true pioneers, ones that have crossed thresholds and forged paths where there weren't before. I'm honored to welcome the legendary Laraaji, considered a forefather of ambient and new age music, whose work over decades has refined and redefined the boundaries of sound and spirituality. Laraaji is known for his joyful, meditative compositions and radiant energy, and our esteemed guest embodies that seamless fusion of art and spirituality, lifting listeners into elevated consciousness. So Laraaji, I'm so honored to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
I accept your welcome. Yes. Aha. Hello, Jesse.
I would love to just dive in and hear your thoughts as someone who's been creating art, creating with a conscious effort and speaking on a soul level of this idea that sometimes I talk about. I don't know if this will resonate with you. I'll say the artist path is the spiritual path. They are very much the same. And the more that we seek to be the best artist, we need to go deeper into our spiritual life, and vice versa. Sometimes when we dive into spiritual, it impacts our artistry. And I just know when I experience your music, I experience the beauty of the artistry of it, but it's also a spiritual experience. So how does that just kind of feel for you when I throw that your way?
I accept myself at times as an artist, other times as a mind science practitioner, and other times as a spiritual athlete. There's a spiral in there. And also I think and I feel art is a ritual. When I approach performance, recording, and even jam sessions as a ritual, the preparation of the space within which I'm going to record or perform or jam is approached with a ritualistic sensitivity of setting the stage, setting the intention, setting the atmosphere. There's times when I would even use incense. I don't use incense so much now, it compromises the breathing space. But colors, setting the intention could be 45 minutes before going into a session or practice. What I'm doing with consciousness and focus is setting up the space, the interior field and the outer space for the practice. So there's a ritual, and a ritual mentality and a ritual intention carries into the artistic expression. There's a ritualistic feeling of the music. The music is not just helter-skelter. And I sense that everything I'm doing, whether it's recording or performing or transmitting consciousness, was deeply inspired by my having been baptized in the Christian faith at a young age. And I've sensed that baptism experience carries over into what I'm attempting to do with sound. There's a saying that, hurt people hurt people, saved people save people, and baptize people baptize people. And I believe I'm baptizing, extending that baptismal experience through my music. The idea of baptizing with sound is to provide an environment within which the thinking or the feeling individual is given an opportunity for an epic shift, an emotional shift into sometimes an epic sensation of time, space, and the self. And so what I'm doing artistically or spiritually or through mind science practice is offering a space through sound that can allow the emotional nature, the psychological nature in the listener, of the listener, to experience an epic opportunity to enter an otherwise inaccessible experience of themselves, or of time, space, and energy. And the ritual approach that's preparing my performance space, my recording space, with a ritualistic sense, giving sense to detail, textures, colors, vibration of the performance space, positivity, little things like that.
So would you say that, as you're setting the stage, as you're performing your own ritual, there's a sense, because even music that's ambient or new age or non-vocal or lyrical, I think a lot of people kind of associate maybe having with like a awareness or an awakening to like maybe some lines or lyrics that bring awakening. But there's a spirit that you simply imbue into every piece of it that becomes part of the art itself.
Yes, words have been a challenge for me.
Mm-hmm.
People ask, why don't I sing more? And I do sing more. But the idea of using words that trigger the mind as a linear information processing event, I try to downplay that and not give the mind something to think about. So the nonverbal space is the target, how to bring the listener, the patient, the client, the student back into present time, where the self, if you call the self, is the pure mind, is not vibrating according to titles, names, and classifications that are being worn.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my earlier practices in spiritual self reclaiming is to sit in a place comfortable and take off all titles that have been used to point to this body or point to this idea of self, and sit with just the I am without any modifiers or classifications or titles on it. I found that to be a very interesting pursuit. I was told that it's possible, and I just couldn't imagine how you could do that. But if you can bowl, you can get back to the pure I am. It's a matter of learning how to be still in a concentrated way. And for 21 minutes, it took me almost a half a year to learn how to sit still for 21 minutes. And what happens after that 21 minutes is that another version of the present time universe slips into my awareness. And I'm amazed. It's like the thinking mind, the content of your thinking mind creates what I call a blind spot. It blocks me from seeing the pure I am. And so when I take time out and relax from all the titles, all the beautiful ones, all the grand ones, all the proud titles, and be with just I am, there is the self dwelling in present time. And this present time place is so yummy. You can call it transcendental, you can call it ethereal, you can call it spiritual, you can call it the great holy moly, but it's the self without the modifiers. And it's here where I found myself attracting higher states of consciousness and even attracting paranormal hearing experiences. I say that the mind or the self that has titles on is the self that is wearing filters. And these filters act like a blind spot, a spiritual blind spot. Can you imagine that if you want to use the term God, that this is God right here? If I'm wearing modifiers like I am the bank teller, I am the taxi cab driver, I am the musician, these modifiers act like a blind spot and make it mostly difficult for me to accept the thought that I am God. And anyone who denies that I am God is probably working with a blind spot. And it's not funny to them. It's not funny to the one who can't see. If you tell somebody they're a millionaire, but they don't know, how is it that I'm a millionaire? I've just got $20 in the bank. And if you know something about that individual that they have not yet opened up to, you can talk to the millionaire consciousness where that $20 person is. And they might think, it's something weird. Why are you talking to me like that? But that's the idea of a guru, a spiritual teacher, is someone who knows how to talk and address the self that
Mm-hmm.
is behind this illusionary
Mm-hmm.
cluster of titles and names.
Mm-hmm. Laraaji, I want to go back a little bit because something you said really resonates with me. And recently I was listening to your baptismal album. And that, how old were you when you were baptized?
The body was 12, and I chose that age because that was what I believe Yeshua, or the person called Jesus, took
Yeah.
baptism.
Because this is part of my own spiritual journey too. I grew up Christian, and that album was moving me deeply as I was listening to it. These long songs, and the imagery on the the cover of the album was so beautiful too. And I feel like a lot of people who maybe I'm so curious about your own kind of calling into that, but then also beyond that, and what you're doing now is maybe reintegrating this thing. But also, I'll just speak for myself, where, and I see a lot of people do this. Maybe they reject a lot of the things as they expand to like a deeper awareness of God, but they're losing something really precious and beautiful that is still there for them. And so I'm just kind of curious about that reclamation of your own as you've gone into more Hindu practices or other spiritual practices, and yet having this album about this and the experience that you're maybe ushering people through in that song, in that music.
Well, that album was co-produced, performed with Mark Kramer.
Mm-hmm.
He made a lot of contribution to that album. But the idea of baptism, I would say that anyone who is awakened, fully awakened, can understand the behavior of someone who's not awakened. And it calls for a certain amount of grace and maturity to process someone who does not yet know who they are on the transcendental level. To how not to get angry, how not to get pissed off, how not to get irritated. And technically, you shouldn't if you are practicing God presence while you're speaking, while you're in the presence of the seeming othernesses.
Yeah.
Now, you talked about people not owning this. Once again, the term spiritual blind spot comes up. And I see a boon that has happened in the last 50 years is that people experimenting with mind altering, mind shifting substances, sometimes called plant teachers or plant medicine. And those who have practiced a religious spirituality and have been sincere about it, but have still remained outside of the inner circle. I think they hear about God, they hear about Yeshua, they hear about spirit, but they don't quite get it. And I believe that this plant teachers, plant medicines might be one turning point for many individuals where they get something that's nonverbal. It's enough to talk about the Bible, the Quran, the green emerald tablets, the Torah, but the real deal is nonverbal. And the reason why it's nonverbal is because it's nonlinear. It doesn't answer to linear language. You can point to it, but to feel it for yourself and to get it for yourself, myself, I had to be still. And be still means be still from all the titles, names, and classifications that the external world uses to point to this individual. And I either be in a closet or be in a meditation room or be in a yoga asana. I think yoga asanas are wonderful places to be alone with spirit. And so students, followers who are not getting the full enchilada are not getting it because they're trying to get to it. And that's the big thing. You can't get I don't believe you can get to God because God is not on the linear plane.
Mm,
My observation is that here comes the big one. The only way to get to God is as God. Somewhere you have to wake up and think as God, feel as God, see as God. Yes, I'm talking about little o me, little o you. See as God is seeing through these eyes. In this
yeah.
way, I see the cosmos, I see eternity, I see the unity of all things. I see the things that will pass and that I don't get bent out of shape about.
Mm,
So the idea of each individual, I can understand their response. And you say, you're divine, you're eternal, you are perfect. And of course, they can reply, not what I'm seeing, not what I'm hearing,
yeah.
not the way I grew up, not the
Yeah.
things that I've done in my life. And still, the self that's behind the titles do it. The titles get angry, the titles are upset, the titles get depressed. But in the midst of it all is the pure I am, which in the Hindu tradition, they call it the Ananda, the pure bliss. The basic core self is pure bliss. We don't have to get blissful. We don't have to create it. What we have to do is
Hmm.
undo the ribbons, the titles. They're glorious titles. We've been given lots of titles and we get attached to them
Yeah.
without knowing that they are contributing to what I still call a blind spot to our eternal divinity.
When you were just starting out, because we're going back quite a few years, when again, as I introduced you as a real pioneer, like a lot of the music that you've created did not exist in its, especially new age and meditation music and spiritual music, what do you want to call it? Now there's a ton of it, but you were at a time where that didn't exist. And so what I'm really curious about is this space that I think everybody experienced on some level, but you really uh, embodied it in a very specific way of like maybe hearing some calling, hearing some invitation. And even though
Yes,
that land did not exist, Laraaji, I'm calling you to do something that doesn't necessarily make sense, but you stepped forward in faith somehow. And here you are decades later with a huge discography, all these experiences, all these people who you've elevated, but going back to that moment of mystery and unknown, and how do you trust that voice to do something that seems crazy, bizarre, but you're trusting that spirit and that calling?
that is a good answer to which the good question. And it is during meditative, my early meditative explorations, I learned how to sit for 5 hours from 12 to 5 in the morning and learn how to stay empty and open and present. And it was that time and practice that I attracted we call it a paranormal hearing experience or cosmic nadam or music of the spheres. I didn't know I was going to attract it. I wasn't looking to attract it, but I inadvertently had prepared myself to have this experience. And it was one night just before going into deep meditation. And I'm standing in the living room of this house in Queens where I lived at the time and making eye contact with myself in the mirror. And I found myself in this current of eternal sound, an eternal sound current. Uh, Practically speaking, I could say that it was layers and layers of brass instruments weaving this most glorious pad texture, and as if celebrating the divinity of the eternal present moment and celebrating the oneness of everything that is. Was it was like a cosmic family reunion, and I think I might have been close to tears at the depth of this beautiful experience. The It was a soul release experience, releasing the soul from third and fourth dimensional claustrophobia also giving me a new model of what sound can be to a listener. That as I was hearing this experience, my analytical mind was saying, how is this happening? No one in the house would be playing the music at this time of the night. I can't write this down or record it. And so I would just surrender to this immersion experience. And after it happened, and I must say that it never happened, because the teaching that I came away from there is that there's no future or past, that everything is continuous present time. So there I was given this sound vision, not knowing what to do with it. The very next day, I went into town to Lincoln Center Music Library and did research to find something that would point to the experience I had just had. And there was, in the library, there was literature on Nadam, the inner sound current, music of the spheres, Shabbat yoga. And in the Bible uses the term, in the beginning was the Word. The Word is representing this sound current. So now I've gotten this information and I'm still asking, well, what do I do with this information? Because I'm saying, this is the sound experience I wouldn't mind sharing. This would be me, a baptized person, baptizing others with this kind of sound. This made the most sense in the world. So maybe a month later, I'm being guided to be at a pawn shop in Queens with my guitar, to pawn it for money. I thought I was there for money. But as I was at the desk, the clerk, the store owner, offered me only $25 for the guitar. So there was my first lesson in pawning. You don't get what you... So as I was going into the pawn shop, I noticed in the window this auto harp, zither. And I just vibed on it. I say, oh, there's that interesting looking instrument I used to see with bluegrass ensembles when I was doing comedy in the village.
Yeah.
So there I'm standing in front of the clerk and I'm disenchanted. I say, this is not going to work. And this voice, this guidance voice that you questioned me about, came into focus, very loud, very clear, very warm, very intelligent, and very non-local. And it said, don't take money, swap it for the instrument in the window. And I was kind of mystified, but I was also prepared, because some of my spiritual exercise during that time was called New Thought Religion, which means if you can think a new thought, you can change your life. And that it's advised that you daily do something unlike the way you've done it before. In other words, break patterns. And so here was an opportunity to break a pattern of following an inner voice, to swap my guitar for that instrument in the window. So I left that shop with the auto harp and $5. And I made a deal. So I went home and started tuning my favorite open tune tunings into the auto harp. And to make a long story short, eventually I was playing on the sidewalks of Brooklyn, where I moved to, and discovering that my meditative practice was bleeding through my performance, my improvisational music, and listeners were getting it. And here I was. That voice had guided me to answering the question, how can I transmit that paranormal sound hearing experience into a sharing experience? And there I was realizing that this instrument at the time with the auto harp was the instrument which I could perform from meditative friendly states. And from there on, I was beaming this music in Brooklyn and in Manhattan, in parks, and eventually getting invited to play for New Age conferences, meditation centers, and official concerts. So there was me following that voice. And the voice I'd say it's very tricky because I would imagine everyone is receiving this cosmic broadcast. And if the thinking mind is too dominant, it's very easy to push that inner voice aside and say, I've got something better to do, or I've got something more practical to do. But there's something very deep and transformative about taking the voice seriously. Because in the instant that I switch from my private plans to this plan, a whole other universe slips into action for me. I feel like I am following a cosmic flow. And the idea that I'm in a cosmic intelligence field becomes real for me. And that is profoundly healing. It's, and you learn how to trust that voice, and you trust that it's always here. And it gives me the ability to let go of the fear of the future as it's being defined by the local planetary environment.
This is so that, and I want to dial in for a second here because it's so profound to me for so many artists and a lived experience. But that transmission, as you're saying, is always being sent. One, we're just not always hearing that transmission, and two, we're not always obeying when we hear it. But you, in that moment, you heard it and you obeyed, and that's the act of faith.
I was prepared.
Yeah.
I'm told that yoga practice, an hour and 15 minutes of a yoga practice, is for the purpose of relaxing the body into the corpse pose, so that we are in the most receptive posture, shavasana, for hearing and practicing being in this space. Even if you do a yoga class and go into shavasana and have no experience, what you're doing by doing shavasana often enough is that you are putting yourself in a place to not resist inner guidance when it comes very clear to you.
And one of the things, because I love this message from you specifically, not only the spiritual experience of it, but because now you're on the other side of so many years of, I think what, I don't know, Shah, you would define it, but a lot of artists would define success, meaning that you have created the art that was in your soul and spirit. You have put it out into the world. You've had these amazing experiences. You shared your gift to the world. But on the other side are people, maybe younger, who keep looking at, I need to pay rent. I have these stresses. What do I do? What do I do? And in that moment, you walked through the door or the opening of, do I get a little more money so I can pay my bills, or do I trust the spirit and look at what trusting the spirit creates, and getting away from this fear of whatever the temporal is. Does this make sense to you?
Yes, and I'd say that there are challenges when one opens up to decide that this is the path they want to experiment with. Because when I open up and accept that this is my path and I'm getting serious about it, there's something called a suffering period. Suffering, I mean, letting go of the realm of obligations and responsibilities that I entered into before I realized that I am a more divine oriented being. For instance, I've made obligations in my residential life to pay rent or to exchange services for rent. And on one particular day, when I'm supposed to be handling an obligation, I get this voice that says, put that down, go pick up your instrument and go to Central Park and play. And I'm staring at my landlord saying, I just got a message, go to Central Park and play music.
He's like, I didn't hear that message.
No, but that is a critical, iconic point of time when I know I heard the voice. I know what happens if I ignore it. I'll just fall back into the mundane. And I know what happens when I go out and do it and come back and try to explain this to this individual. So there's that period of intention, stress, when you are faced with, do I fall back into the mundane, what's expected of me in order to avoid a catastrophic event? Or do I follow this voice knowing that I'm deepening my association with the spirit world and deepening my trust with the spiritual world? So on that particular incident, I did go to Central Park. It was early in the morning on a Saturday, I guess, because that night there was a party in the residence where I was supposed to be helping the landlord. But anyhow, that morning I went to Central Park with my instrument, and there was nobody. I was playing near the zoo, and there was nobody there. And I'm saying, oh. And so I'm playing, and I'm saying, well, okie dokie. I know I heard that voice. So as I stop playing, I'm noticing that these two pairs of feet standing about 6 feet in front of me, they've been there for a while, but I didn't really take them as to be of significance until one of the feet, what happened to belong to a woman, came over to me. She kneeled down and put some money into my zither case, and she looked me in the eye, very beautiful smile, and says, "You're psychic, aren't you?" And I thought, uh-oh, here it comes. And she invited the man who was with her to come over, and he kneeled down and said, and introduced his name, I think Bob Petro, something like that. And they both made it clear to me that he is in the process of putting together an album of guided meditations, spoken word, and they were looking for the right music, and that this was the music they wanted. And they hired me on the spot. They gave me some money for car fare to come up to New England a few days later to embark on this project with him. So that validated my hair. So I went back to the place where I was living, and I'm thinking to myself, this is the crossroads. I've got to face this fire. I've got to own the fact that I'm on a spiritual path and I listen to the inner voice, no matter how ridiculous it sounds to someone else. I went into the establishment where I was residing, and there was the landlord, not talking, came over to me, and he says, "What happened to you? Where'd you go?" And I said, I followed the voice through Central Park. And he was an ex-Marine. So he had put his hand on my chest and pushed me across the space and said, "I don't want to hear any of your muck-a-muck." Mm. So here's the great, I went downstairs to gather what was left of belongings that I think I needed and my zither, and I left the loft and never returned. I think I stayed with a cousin for a while, and I stayed with another person who was very much into my music and the spiritual path. But that kind of event can take place when you make the decision to cross into what you know is your higher calling. It could literally piss someone off because you've broken a contract, and the temptation is to want to honor the contract. You want everybody to be happy. Mm-hmm. But here is a crucial calling. It says, "I'm calling you from beyond." And you're free to ignore it. I can't come down there and grab you by the collar and make you do it. But when you make the decision to follow it, it gets easier and easier. And what's most important, that you learn how to not contract your life out to unaligned obligations. Mm.
Mm. For other artists who, are inclined, I feel like all artists have a certain special opening channel, but they're not necessarily working or going through the exploration of opening that even further, whatever it might be. How would you, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that artists that you're referring to, my understanding that most of them or all of them feel they have a beautiful gift they want to give to the world. Absolutely. They want to bring the world into a more healing resonance performance.
Yeah.
And if that is their true intention, then what should be most important to them is that they should contact the healer within themselves. the beauty within themselves, the bliss within themselves. It's one thing to practice your instrument and to have
Hmm.
a model out there in the world that you want to follow,
Hmm.
but the artist, the musician, the sound performer, the sound bath must take time to get it. They must to get behind that what do you call it, the blind spot, and get to know the pure I am of the divine, of the God self, where they are. And it's only as difficult as the conditioning that you're still under.
You're right.
It. I can remember times when if I had said that I am God, that it would have been inappropriate for myself and others because it would be me trying to say that I am God when I should be saying everything is God,
Right. Right.
and that I know it. And the more I know it, I can project the coordinates of that truth to a musical listener. So I'm saying artists that want to bring a healing experience or a blissifying experience or an epically beautiful experience to the emotional life of a listener
Hmm.
is to first know the foundation of that is that there is one and only one that I
Hmm.
know, infinite, all pervading God, divine, creative intelligence right here where I am. And that as I know it during my performance, it cannot help but to ooze out into the sound and to make an epic listening experience for the listener. It's,
Absolutely.
yes, that's my experience that I've had to do what they call your inner work. I had to do the inner work.
And the beauty that I see there, that we still are maybe having our own limitations, is that for the artist who is going to plunge into that space, there where that source starts to express themselves in their alignment might not sound like Laraaji's music. It might not sound like my music. It's going to be, as you were saying earlier, when you treat the art with a certain ritual and you embed that spirit into your art, it's going to have its own really unique fingerprint within that artist. And
Yes,
that's we see a larger tapestry that we get to see of this
I,
experience together.
I love that larger tapestry that each artist will speak to the divinity within the listener in their own way, through their
Hmm.
own language, through their own vocabulary. And if it's authentic, it's going to touch a listener, regardless of what their ethnic or religious background is. I saw that in Central Park when I played many times. People from different religious and ethnic traditions would stop and listen,
Hmm.
and they would, because the music was addressing a non-verbal, non-linear reality, authenticity where they are.
Hmm. Absolutely. Laraaji, before we wrap this up, and I thank you so much for this time you've honored and brought to this space. One last thing. I know you are a big proponent of laughter. So,
Mm-hmm.
and this is the last thing because I feel like sometimes when we talk about these deep things, and this is like coming from my own experience, I'm so guilty of this. I come from like the gothic kind of dark vibey thing, and sometimes you can associate deep with dark and heavy, but deep can also be joy and laughter.
Oh yeah, go deep into light, deep into the release, deep into resolution. I said resolving. Resolution is getting away from heaviness, from density, getting away from overthinking. And so, with my laughter practice covers the entire physical body from the head to the throat, the heart, the abdomen, the lung. So it brings me to a place that's near Shavasana, a
Mm.
totally releasing, softening, and opening. And here we're standing ready. We're in a posture that's receptive to divine intervention, divine acknowledgement, divine information.
Mm.
So, laughter on a daily basis as a self practice, doing it in the morning, 15 minutes before getting out of bed, if you're a musician, in the
Mhm.
afternoon before getting out of bed.
True, very true.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
And yeah, but I'm doing more and more laughter workshops along with concerts when I do tours. And so there's that uh, laughter is on the road with me.
beautiful. I'm hoping to make it out maybe early next year or in the summer to the ashram. So I'm hoping for a moment to brush shoulders with you and meet you in person if the things provide the opportunity.
Okie dokie. Thank you so much.
Um,
Laraaji.blogspot.com is a place where you can go to check out my touring path.
Beautiful. And I'll
Laraaji.blogspot.com.
put your social media links and everything in the
Yes,
show
beautiful,
description.
Jesse.
And sorry, go ahead.
I'd say it's very stimulating being with you. You're introducing me to myself.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, all you listeners, for joining us in this episode of the Art and Void podcast. I hope you found some inspiration and insight from this conversation that will inspire you in your artistic endeavors. Remember, the void is not an emptiness to be feared, but a space of infinite possibilities waiting to be explored.